From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Brad Turner, in today for Erin O'Toole. The vast space around Earth is beginning to get a little crowded. There are nearly 10,000 satellites in Earth's low orbit. That's the space just outside our planet's atmosphere. And space companies plan to launch tens of thousands more in coming years. That could lead to problems like interruptions to communications from satellites that monitor the weather, or we could see satellites crashing into one another. So, how do we make rules to prevent those kind of accidents, and how much regulation of space is too much? A gathering at the University of Colorado Law School this week is confronting those questions. The Space and Spectrum Policy Conference began Tuesday. Keith Grembin is a professor and co-director of the Spectrum Policy Initiative at CU Boulder, and he helped organize the conference. He joined me to talk about why one of his main goals with the conference is simply to raise awareness of this issue.
To give you an example of what's happening up there, over 2,800 satellites launched in 2023.
Wow.
And year over year, that number is going up by something like 20%. On the flip side, only about 200 satellites a year become inactive.
Wow.
So it's just getting more and more crowded. By one count, there's over 128 million pieces in orbit that are bigger than pea size.
That's kind of a mind-boggling number. What is the danger of having too many objects orbiting Earth?
Well, there's always a danger of collisions or conjunctions, as they're known in the satellite industry. I've talked to satellite operators that say it's not unusual to have 10 near misses a day.
Wow.
And the problem is if they don't miss and they hit, then they create a debris field with more of these little particles of debris that are, again, a threat to other satellites.
So your conference is about what to do about all of this. There's no central organization that monitors or approves the launch of a satellite. Individual governments make up their own rules and criteria for that. Why is that a problem?
Well, part of the problem is satellites don't just stay over one country. They fly over the entire world. And so any satellite affects multiple countries. And with no one group in charge, what's to keep anybody from acting uncooperatively with other operators?
What's a problem or even a near miss caused by having this crowded low orbit around Earth?
Well, when satellites are crowded together, for one thing, you can only communicate them with radio frequency. And there's a limited number of frequency bands that are usable. And as you get space more and more crowded, you've got to manage these frequencies more carefully. And it's not like TV and radio stations that are fixed. These things are moving, crossing over each other.
This is how we have GPS communications. This involves weather forecasting. All kinds of everyday uses here on Earth are affected by what happens with these satellites.
Yeah, people really are largely unaware of the incredible economic and personal benefits we get from space.
Yeah.
Very few people think much about the GPS in their phone and using Google Maps to guide them, but that wouldn't be there without GPS satellites up in space.
Yeah. Experts with different viewpoints are at this conference at CU to discuss how we should manage space as a finite resource around Earth. Some of these groups want different things. Can you give me an example of two groups that have opposing ideas on how they want to use space or regulate space?
Well, for example, let's take the scientific community. Optical and radio astronomers would like to have dark and quiet skies to be able to do their observations. And with more satellites in space, there's more streaks going through the optical astronomers' images. And with more satellites in space, there's more radio frequency noise that affects radio astronomy.
Keith, one of your specialties is the regulation of radio frequencies. Do you have a good example from history of what can happen when there is unregulated airspace?
Sure. There's a very good example of that. So when radios were first becoming popular, everybody could build their own little radio set and transmit. And by 1910, the U.S. Navy was complaining that there were so many people on the airwaves that there was not only interference, but there were so many false calls for SOSs that the Navy didn't know what to respond to.
Wow.
And then the Titanic sank, and they radioed, and there was enough, again, interference that the calls for help were not heard. And so that led to the Radio Act of 1912, which was the first regulation of radio frequencies and demanded that people get licenses before they were allowed to transmit.
So you're sort of trying to prevent some sort of a low-orbit Titanic-type incident from taking place.
Exactly. We'd rather not have a crisis hit, but think about the issues ahead of time and prevent them proactively.
We're seeing private companies like SpaceX launch rockets into orbit more and more. How concerned are you about private spaceflight adding to our crowded skies?
That's definitely one of the issues. I mean, SpaceX is launching thousands of satellites, and now Amazon Kuiper is going to be doing the same. And there are satellite companies popping up left and right.
Yeah.
And they're all going to need orbital slots, and they're all going to need radio frequencies to communicate. I mean, I think the Chinese alone are planning on launching 20,000 or more satellites in the next few years.
What do you fear might happen if we don't regulate space use right now?
We wait for something bad to happen, and then regulation will be forced on us. Unfortunately, once two satellites collide and they create a debris field, that debris field can hit other satellites. And there's even a theory that that can create a chain reaction that would knock out an entire orbital shell. Additionally, satellites interfere with each other, and we don't want our weather reports to be inaccurate because satellites got too close to each other and interfered with communications.
Let's say you develop a framework for managing how we use space for our satellites. How do you get all the countries in the world on the same page around something like that?
That's the real question. And there have been a number of attempts to try that. There was in the 60s, there was an outer space treaty signed, but it was very limited enforcement conditions. And that's something that's really important, because how do you keep somebody from being a bad actor if there's no consequences?
Keith Grenben is a professor and co-director of the Spectrum Policy Initiative at CU Boulder. He helped organize the Space and Spectrum Policy Conference, which is happening at CU Boulder this week. We'll put a link to learn more about the conference in our show notes and at KUNC.org. We'll also include a link to our past conversation about dark sky preservation programs. You can find all of our past In The NoCo episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, we love hearing feedback from listeners. So if you have thoughts on this episode or any episode, tell us about it. Email noco@kunc.org. That's NOCO@kunc.org. We look forward to hearing from you. That's it for In The NoCo today. I'm Brad Turner. Thank you for listening.